Welcome to Growing Greener, your guide to environmentally informed gardening. Produced in association with the Berkshire Botanical Garden, this program brings you each week some expert who puts you in touch with a different aspect of working in partnership with nature. Our goal is to make your landscape healthier, more beautiful, more sustainable, and more fun. This is your host, Tom Christopher, and this week we will be welcoming back to this program Heather Holm. Heather is an expert naturalist and dedicated conservationist with a special interest in pollinators. She's also an author who has won many awards with her books. Today we will be speaking with Heather about her most recent publication, Wasps, their biology, diversity, and role as beneficial insects and pollinators of native plants. Welcome back, Heather.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, I want to talk about your new book, Wasps. But first, I thought I'd mention your previous book. There's one about pollinators for native plants, and then there's bees.
Right.
Which bees won several awards, didn't it?
It did. Yeah, it won 6 book awards. But interestingly, I think the pollinator book tends to be more popular because it sort of is geared toward a broader audience, which is fine.
Well, they're both kind of standard guides, I think, on the subjects. And I wonder why did you choose to focus on wasps this time?
Yeah, I guess some people thought, oh boy, that's a crazy idea, right? And I started writing the wasp book almost 4 years ago, and I thought, well, I really have no idea if the world is ready for a book on wasps, but I'm just going to go for it and see what happens.
Well, they aren't the most popular insects with the general public. You know, bees sting too, but they get a pass, I think, because we love honey, and honeybees, of course, produce honey. And that's only one species of bee and not a native one. But why do you think wasps are regarded with such fear and dislike?
Well, I guess we have the very small percentage of social wasps to blame for the general public perception that just people don't like wasps and don't really think that they provide any kind of benefit to humans. And, you know, just like a social bee, there's really just a higher propensity for a social organism to defend their nest. And generally the insect that people get stung by most frequently would be by a social wasp. So I really wanted to write the book to get people to understand that wasps are diverse, they're fascinating, and there's just a large number of wasps out in landscapes that we're managing that really go unnoticed and are providing some really important ecosystem services. So I'm hoping the book will change some minds, I guess.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, cover a couple of the social wasps that people may have encountered, and
So
their sorrow.
Yeah, so the native species, there's really I'd say two groups. There's the paper wasps that often build in more built environments. You'll find their open cell nests on house soffits. They like to attach the nest to a horizontal object. And then there are the yellow jackets, which include both species that build the paper conical nests that hang in trees, in addition to ones that nest below ground. And so it's those species that nest below ground that often people have run-ins with. You know, they may be mowing their lawn or doing some garden work and are unaware of a ground nest. And that's generally when people get stung by social wasps.
Yeah, I have vivid memories of stepping into a yellow jacket nest when I was gardening once and having them fly up the inside of my clothing.
Yeah, I have the same experience. I was about 10 years old, and my father had built a treehouse for me, and I came down the ladder from my treehouse and stepped right on a yellow jacket nest. And like you just described, they flew up my pants, and I remember running across the lawn trying to actually get my pants off so they wouldn't continue to sting me. And that was definitely an unpleasant experience. And I think that memory of the unpleasant experience is often really hard for some people to overcome and be willing to learn about wasps and why they're beneficial. But that's one of my challenges, I guess, as an educator, right?
Yeah, it is just one memory for me. And it's, in 40 some years of gardening, that's all I've got to blame wasps for. And they were just protecting their home.
Exactly. Yeah. It's home protection. So, if you sort of start to understand why they would do that, why they would want to sting us, um, then I think we can come around to the idea that we can't really blame them for wanting to defend their house.
But wasps do benefit gardens specifically in a couple of ways. They're important as pollinators, and I guess some of them prey upon garden pests. I mean, could you speak to those points?
Yeah, so there's a number of really beneficial relationships with wasps and the prey that they hunt. So I mentioned paper wasps, and paper wasps primarily hunt caterpillars. And so there's a number of studies that demonstrate that they can effectively control caterpillar populations such as the cabbage looper, tomato hornworm, or the tobacco hornworm. So even in an agricultural context, they're hunting enough to help reduce the population and the damage that caterpillar population may be causing to plants. But from our gardening perspective, they're hunting a lot of not wasps in general, because the other than the social wasps, many of the solitary species have very specific prey. So they may be hunting herbivorous or seed-eating insects such as weevil larvae, grasshoppers, katydids. So there's a lot of benefit just in the prey specialization and what they're hunting in our gardens and landscapes that may be damaging our plants.
Describe to me, if you will, how important they are as pollinators.
Well, the jury's still out, of course. Pollination studies are very difficult, and it's hard to quantify whether an insect is truly pollinating a plant, transferring that pollen from one plant to the next of the same species. But what's important, I guess, for folks tuning in to understand is that most adult wasps, particularly the group of wasps they're called the stinging or aculeate wasps, they're largely getting as adults, they're getting all of their food from flower nectar or similar sugary substances such as honeydew, from the waste from aphids, or perhaps tree sap. So flowers play a really important role in their food source and their ability to hunt prey and build nests and do all those things that they need to do to produce the next generation of wasps. So without a flower-rich landscape like we would plant for bees that are specifically collecting pollen and nectar to feed their offspring, wasps are utilizing primarily flower nectar as a primary food source.
So
And
they do the hunting to feed their larvae?
yeah, so the insects or spiders are what the adult wasps hunt to cache back in their nest to feed their larvae, but their diet basically switches to sugary, carbohydrate-rich substances once they're adults.
Describe for me the life cycle of a solitary wasp. Or, I mean, I'm sure that it varies considerably with the species, but what are some of the differences between them and the social wasps?
So many of the solitary wasps, similar to solitary bees, may only produce one generation per year. And so that really means that they have a specific window of time or seasonal phenology that they're active. So, for example, there's a group of wasps called sand wasps because they primarily nest in loose sand, and they would be active, in the summer months, hunting their prey, either flies or plant bugs. So that one generation per year life cycle means that they are active at the same time each year. And you can think of the time between an egg is laid and the adult emerges from the nest from that egg is approximately 12 months. And that's kind of similar to many of our native solitary bees. We do have some solitary wasp species that produce multiple generations per year. So sometimes that can be influenced by climate. So in Florida, some species are active almost every month of the year and are continuously producing more and more generations. So it's really species dependent, and that information can help you understand when or if you may observe a particular wasp species while you're out working in your garden or taking a hike in the natural area near your house.
I just want to repeat the title of your book, which is Wasps, A Guide for Eastern North America. And it's a very handsome book. A lot of photographs. Where did you get the photographs? Did you take them yourself?
Yeah, many of the photographs are my own. I did source quite a few from other talented photographers, particularly because of COVID. I had planned to do some trips in the US, to Texas and Florida to pick up some of the southern species that I wouldn't see where I live here in Minnesota. But those trips were canceled because of COVID. So I did source many of the photographs from other photographers. And really the intent of the design of the book was to really make that strong association with flowers and with native plants. And the photographs help to, the intent was to, people see a beautiful book and they see a beautiful wasp up close on a flower, that maybe it would help them understand how important they are and how amazing they are. So yeah, the book was sort of overly designed to be beautiful, to help people maybe change their mind about wasps.
Oh, very good. You have a section in the introduction titled, Why Are Wasps Fascinating? Maybe you could make the case to my listeners.
Well, I think many of their life histories and natural history is absolutely fascinating. I mentioned the prey specificity. So you think of the challenges of an individual species. They may need to nest in a specific soil type, for example, or they may be nesting in stems of woody branches or plant stems like some of our native bees do. But then they really have to be setting up their nest site in close proximity to very specific prey. And so that's one of the, I would say, the complexities or challenges for many of these solitary wasp species, is that they really have a lot of parameters that limit them where they would occur. And some of the really fascinating things, some wasps hunt ant queens. There's a species called the Eastern ant queen kidnapper wasp, and the females will only hunt ant queens when they have wings. And ant queens leave the nest winged and fly, and then the males find them and mate with them. And shortly after they mate, they lose their wings. So this ant queen kidnapper wasp will only hunt the queens when they have wings. So it's a very short window of time that they have to find their prey in order to be the right prey to cache inside of their nest. So it's kind of like little tidbits like that, to me, are just amazing and fascinating, that without the right, like I said, the recipe is very specific. And if you remove one of the ingredients, it's not going to help a wasp fulfill its life cycle duties.
So that's a great name for a wasp, I have to say. It sounds, just the name alone sounds like an adventure story.
Exactly.
But they need a whole kind of ecosystem then to flourish. It's not they don't just fly in and take nectar from your flowers, but they need nesting sites, they need appropriate prey.
Right. So their habitat components, I guess I would describe that as a little bit more complex than maybe a bee's. A bee needs diverse supply of flowering plants and ideal nesting sites, but you tack on sort of that third component, that the wasps also need prey availability. So something to think about if we want to encourage more wasp species coming to our gardens, landscapes, or where you would want to look for them if you were out hiking in a natural area, for example.
Heather, I need to take a break to remind listeners that this is WESU 88.1 FM, and they are listening to Growing Greener, a weekly program about gardening in partnership with nature. Today, we are talking with Heather Holm, an award-winning author, about her most recent book, Wasps, A Guide for Eastern North America. So this book is not comprehensive, is it? You didn't try to cover all the wasps in Eastern North America.
No, that would be quite the tome, I think, if I tried to do that. No, the book covers primarily the larger species of wasps that people would more easily recognize if they were out looking at what different insects are visiting their flowering plants. And so it by no means covers wasp diversity. I think we have over 13,000 species of wasps in North America. And many of those are parasitic wasps, which can be very tiny to large and conspicuous. And many of those are extremely difficult to identify. So I focused on more of the group most closely related to bees, and as a starting point, but the book has over 160 species covered that would be the most commonly observed ones that people would find visiting flowering plants.
Heather, can you tell me about any species of wasps that you find particularly fascinating?
Well, I really like the group called the Potter and Mason wasps, and most of the wasps in that group or subfamily nest above ground, so they have similar nesting strategies to native bees. Many like to use pre-existing cavities, so you may find them occupying things such as bee hotels. And similar to bees, they'll collect mud or generally mud, but bees use other natural materials. And that mud material is used to partition the individual cells inside of a long cavity. So they create individual rooms for each developing wasp larva. The other wasps in that subfamily that don't seek out pre-existing cavities in wood or plant stems, they are masons in a sense. They're building their freeform mud nests. So they have to not only hunt for prey, but they need a source of a particular soil type and a source of water to mix those two materials together to make mud. And some, such as the potter wasps in the genus Eumenes, they make these beautiful jug-shaped mud nests. And the females fill those jugs with caterpillars and then cap the nest off. And then the larva drops down and starts feeding on the caterpillar supply. So some people discover those beautiful jug-shaped mud nests in groupings attached to plant stems. They can also, in more built environments, you'll find them maybe stuck on the siding of your house. But I particularly find the Potter and Mason wasps really interesting, and that they have that nesting strategy of nesting above ground, which is fairly uncommon, or a minority of species do so.
Yeah, in our house in Western Massachusetts, I've noticed up high on the wall, outdoors in a breezeway, so it's under shelter, but it's high up out of reach, a series of mud tubes. Is that, and I think they're wasps.
Yep, those are, if they're, there's a species called the organ pipe mud dauber wasp. And if they look like organ pipes, literally, linear, long,
Yeah.
linear mud tubes, sort of adjacent to each other, yeah, that's the organ pipe mud dauber wasp. There's also other sort of mud dauber like wasps that their nests, I would say, aren't as beautiful. There's the black and yellow mud dauber that makes sort of clunky or clumpy mud cylinder nests attached to sometimes on structures. They fill their nests with spiders. And yeah, so there's a number of species and coming from different families of wasps that are building freeform mud nests like you described.
Yeah, we had a exterminator in to get rid of carpenter ants, and he was very proudly came back and told me that he'd scraped off all of the mud nests. And
Oh no,
I was kind of horrified. I didn't see that they were doing anybody any harm, and
right, right.
didn't know. I had certainly never intended to molest them.
No, I mean, again, a solitary species, very, very unlikely that you would get stung by a wasp building a free-form mud nest on your house. So I would encourage people, yeah, just to leave them alone and use it as a opportunity to observe the females bringing prey back, the females, putting applying the mud and making the nest. That's all really fascinating things, and you can get up close and personal to those solitary species and watch those behaviors.
Yeah, I thought as I thought I enjoyed watching them, and I can imagine other people enjoying watching them if you've set aside your sort of visceral antipathy to, it's like poor snakes that people hate snakes, and it's just not. Most of them are, even the venomous snakes are mostly pretty harmless and
Right.
non-aggressive, and I don't see any reason to aggressively go after some animal just because you've had a bad experience once with.
Exactly. I've got a story. I've got a large nesting aggregation of a solitary bee I monitor close by in my neighborhood, and they're active right now, which means the males are patrolling the ground, flying around just above the ground, waiting for female emergence. And that activity, to someone who doesn't understand bee or wasp behavior, may just get out their can of Raid and spray them. And it just happened that that site, there was some construction going on at that site. So I went over and talked to the construction crew and staked off the area and asked them not to pile materials or disturb the nest. And I scooped one up in my hand that it was actually a male and female mating, and showed them the male and female up close, and that they didn't pose a risk. They were telling me that their work on cell phone towers, they often have run-ins with social wasps, getting stung up high on the towers while they're working. But I think I changed some minds just by doing a little education the other day. So saved a bee population from that reactionary outcome.
Oh, great, great. Do you know, one of the things I enjoyed about your book is you make reference to previous specialists in WASP studies, and particularly it seemed women.
Yeah, there was a number of sort of pioneering women in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Some partnered with their spouses and did a lot of WASP research. One of the things I thought was fun to include in the book were quotes from very old natural history papers, just to give people a sense of the wonder and that people had, 100 years ago, observing a wasp population. And so I thought that was a nice contrast to perhaps my more dry technical writing, to give people a sense that the wasps have long been appreciated, um, and many early natural history studies were conducted by women.
Did you use any apps or online resources to track wasps and find out where sightings had been and that kind of thing?
Yeah, because there's a lot of knowledge gaps, of course, with many of the wasp species. Some are very poorly studied. So to really develop somewhat of a framework of a range map for some of those species, I certainly utilized observations submitted to Bug Guide and iNaturalist. I also reached out to WASP taxonomists to find out what sort of information they had and checklists. So some of the range maps you'll find in the book are just sort of dots, on a map. Others are filled in more, and that's really reflective of what we currently know about wasps. But platforms such as iNaturalist have really demonstrated range expansion or just new occurrences where the wasp wasn't previously known to occur. So one of the exciting things for people who are interested in citizen science, that they can help contribute to science just by photographing and documenting wasps and bees for that matter, and posting their observations on platforms such as Bug Guide, iNaturalist, or in the case of bumblebees, Bumblebee Watch.
I think anybody who's interested in insects and would be interested in your book. But I'm wondering if the listener is from outside of the eastern United States, if you have any recommendations for how they might pursue information about and knowledge about wasps in their area.
Yeah, the book covers, like you said, the eastern US. So it basically the east of the 100th meridian. So it covers the Midwest and, eastern part of Texas, to give you a visual sense of what I'm talking about. There's one other new book on wasps that also came out this year by Eric Eaton. It's not a field guide like mine, but it's a wonderful sort of wonderful book that talks about natural history of wasps worldwide. So right now, to answer your question, Tom, there's really nothing book specific that's fairly new for folks that may be tuning in from the Western US or Western North America. So you would have to largely rely on those platforms that I mentioned to learn more about wasps for Western populations.
And remind me what those platforms are.
You could submit photographs to Bug Guide, iNaturalist, and those would be the two main ones for people at least to get some sort of narrowed down identification of the wasp. And Bug Guide has excellent basic information on many of the species, and will reference literature if you want to really dig in deeply and find out more about what you have observed.
Okay, well, I urge everybody listening to look for Wasps, a guide for Eastern North America by Heather Holm. I assume they'd find it at online bookstores and.
Yep, you'll find it on Amazon, the publisher website, and soon in brick and mortar stores once we have more stores reopen after our COVID pandemic.
Okay, very good. And I know you're a very active speaker, well, perhaps on Zoom these days, but how could people follow where you're speaking and opportunities to listen to you talk about wasps?
Yeah, people can check out my author website, which is pollinatorsnativeplants.com, and there'll be a listing of forthcoming presentations that I will be giving. Many are free or sponsored by the hosting organization. Some will be on wasps, some will be on bees, but there should be a number of opportunities for people to tune in to a presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you. It was great speaking with you.
With this, we've reached the end of another episode of Growing Greener. Please join us again next week at the same time at WESU 88.1 FM for another episode. Or listen to the program as a podcast at thomaschristophergardens.com. If you have comments or suggestions, please contact me at the same website, thomaschristophergardens.com. Growing Greener is produced as a community service in partnership with the Berkshire Botanical Garden of Stockbridge, Massachusetts.